Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Pavan Gupta. I'm a technical marketing engineer for SPA Group. We're going to talk about ISE and Duo integration solutions today. This is going to be our agenda. I'm going to describe about the zero trust for workplace where the ISE is going to be used and workforce where Duo can be used. Once after actually speaking about how do you secure your workplace and workforce with an ISE and Duo respectively, we wanted to actually get started with how do you protect yourself whenever the user is trying to access, an admin user is trying to access admin UI, or a user who is trying to access a network access device, or a user who is connecting to the network, and how we could protect remote access VPN, web portals with the help of Duo. That's what our agenda is going to be, and we're going to have a lot of demos. Just stay tuned to it. I wanted to get started with actually zero trust. What exactly the zero trust is? Zero trust is meant for securing all your access across your networks, applications, and environment, be it your workforce, workplace, and workloads. What the users and the applications can be protected using the workforce, whereas the users and devices connecting to the network can be protected by the workplace, and your applications can be protected by the workloads. Now let's talk about actually workforce, because that is our intention of actually bringing the Duo into this. Now, zero trust for workforce is basically, why do we even require it? It's basically required because of changes happening in the IT landscape. There are more users coming onto the network, more devices coming onto the network, more applications, and even more locations to be managed. This brings up the challenges to the IT, and obviously you have to actually manage the entire users, devices, locations, and everything. The challenges are going to be more and more when you have a stolen credentials, compromised networks, and unsecured devices. This requires a change in your IT security. You are supposed to actually verify whatever may be the application and the service that you're actually exposing, be it in on-prem and off-prem, you're supposed to protect it. You're supposed to actually protect the level of authorization given to the users and devices at the right time and right place and with right privileges. And grant only the access to the users when their work done. That's how they need to adopt the changes. Now, Cisco provides multiple solutions which are already aligned with the zero trust principle, where Duo can be used to secure your workforce, ISE can be used for workplace, and Cisco Secure Workload can be used to protect your workloads. What exactly the MFA? Because that's the context that we are trying to build up here, right? Why we were bringing the Duo into the picture? Because Duo brings us the protecting your login process. Duo basically gives you the multi-factor authentication. What exactly the multi-factor authentication? It's something like, apart from this earlier concept of a credentials-based authentication alone, if you are able to actually protect the application and the login process with the help of what you have, something like a passcodes, pass tokens, or even the push notifications, something like what Duo offers you, or what you are basically like a fingerprint, a retina scanner, something. When you actually have these multi-factor of authentications with the traditional credentials-based authentication, you could actually achieve the security. Now, Duo secures your login process, as I stated earlier. In general, Duo basically works on this principle, this flow. Whenever a user or a device connects to the network and trying to access a server or an application or a service, basically it will be sent to the Duo Cloud service for the once after providing the primary authentication. Then after it's going to be sent to the second factor authentication. When the second factor authentication is approved, you're going to get the access. That's basically idea behind securing your workforce environment with the help of Duo. Now you might have seen ISE this slide a lot of times. ISE is being used to secure your workplace environment where the users and devices connecting to the network through the wired, wireless, and VPN mediums can be protected by the ISE. That's basically what ISE does. Of course, ISE can be integrated with the different identity stores, and the context can be shared with the ecosystem partners. Now, when you integrate both Duo and ISE, what are the advantages that you're going to get? What are the benefits that you're going to get out of it? Consider a scenario. I'm not going to talk about all the aspects here. Just consider the first case here itself. When the user or a device connecting over the wired or a wireless network environment, ISE can protect that network level of access. But when the same user or a device trying to access an application, because ISE itself cannot provide the multi-factor authentication, the Duo can be brought in to protect that application access. So with the help of Cisco ISE and Duo, you are basically securing your network access and protecting your application. That's how completes your zero trust principle for your workforce and workplace environment. Now, this is where it gets interesting. We wanted to get started with what are the solutions possible when you integrate Cisco ISE and Duo together. Now, I wanted to actually get started with this presentation where you might be seeing this most often in our earlier webinars, where the admin user is trying to connect to the PAN. Once after logging to the PAN, whatever configuration changes that being done on the PAN, it gets replicated to the rest of the nodes. You might be seeing the users connecting to the network through the network access devices like wireless, wired, and VPN medium. You would be seeing the users accessing the network access device for the device administration purpose. You would be seeing the users who are trying to access the My Devices sponsor portal and guest portals. These are the entry points for the network access. Now, we wanted to actually protect these entry points for the users and devices coming onto the network with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. That's what our webinar is actually concentrating on. So with that being said, we're going to actually go through these several demos. We will get started with protecting your ISE Admin UI access through the Duo MFA. Then after, we're going to talk about TACACS. We're going to talk about the device administration. We're going to talk about protecting your network access over wired or a wireless environment. We're going to talk about protecting the VPN access and the portals access through the Duo MFA along with the demos. So let's get started with the first thing. How do we protect Cisco ISE Admin UI access with the help of Duo MFA? There are two possibilities here. One is called using the Duo Authentication Proxy. The second one is through the Duo SAML. We're going to talk about both the aspects, and we do have a demos around it. The first and foremost, of course, we are talking about this context. Admin who is trying to log into the PAN, we wanted to protect this access. Now, we'll get started with the first solution where the Duo Authentication Proxy being used. How do we protect ISE UI admin access with the help of Duo Authentication Proxy? Now, an admin user who's trying to log into the ISE, he's going to actually enter the credentials at the login prompt. The entered credentials are going to be sent to Duo Authentication Proxy on-prem. The Duo Authentication Proxy can be installed on Windows or a Linux box. The Duo Authentication Proxy sends it to the primary authentication source. The primary authentication source can be your LDAP, something like Active Directory, or even Radius. Once the credentials have been validated against the primary authentication source, when the primary authentication source says the authentication is successful, that's when the Duo authentication proxy goes ahead with the multi-factor authentication. So sending the requester, second factor authentication requester to Duo Cloud Service, which will in turn get you the push notification or a phone call or a passcode notification. Once you approve, then the admin user is going to get the access. That's how basically you're trying to protect ISE admin access. Now, how we wanted to demonstrate this? Now, let's go ahead with the help of demoing this. Now, I'm logging into the Duo admin panel. We will see, first of all, what configuration is required on the Duo side. I logged into the Duo admin panel. And if you go to the users in Duo admin panel can be added manually, or you can actually import the users through CSV file, or you can even bulk enroll the users, or even you can actually sync the users from your Active Directories or Azure Active Directory or an LDAP. What I'm going to make use of is a directory sync method to sync the users. So I'm going to make use of a directory sync option in order to sync the users in Active Directory. So as I stated earlier, you could actually sync the users from Azure AD, Active Directory, OpenLDAP. I'm making use of an Active Directory sync here. I'm going to consider this as a new connection. I'm going to continue to the configuration. You can view the instructions to how to configure Duo authentication proxy and how do we install an authentication proxy. So you can go ahead directly to installing Duo authentication proxy, from which you can download the exe file. I downloaded it to my download folder, and I'm trying to execute that. I'm trying to install the Duo secure authentication proxy now. It's successfully installed, and it brings up this UI where you're going to configure your authentication proxy with. This authentication proxy configuration can be added manually, or even you can actually manage it via Duo authentication proxy manager itself. By default, the authentication proxy is stopped, and you can it has a default configuration. We're going to now populate the configuration. So let's go ahead and download the pre-configuration available. My environment was requiring the Duo authentication proxy to internet via proxy service. That was the reason why I'm going to add a proxy service. And once after that, I'm going to paste the configuration that I just downloaded. So the cloud configuration is basically to sync the users and the groups of users aligned in the Active Directory. And I'm going to comment out at the rest of the section. Save the configuration. This way, you are trying to actually configure your authentication proxy service to be able to talk to the Duo service in the cloud. Once it gets started, you can basically go ahead and configuring the additional parameters in the Duo admin panel. Now I'm going to configure where my domain controller is residing. That's my IP address of an Active Directory. And I'm going to give the distinguished name of my domain. I wanted to search it throughout my forest. So I'm going to make use of a default configuration authentication type as an integrator to get authenticated with, and save the configuration. Once after saving it, you could see the status was changed to connect. That means the Duo authentication proxy was able to communicate back to the Duo cloud service. Now, because it was connected, we can actually pull the groups from the Active Directory. And I wanted to actually sync only a couple of groups required for me to define the policies and network access. So instead of actually syncing all the users and all the groups, I was trying to actually syncing only the required groups and users. So my users are residing in two groups. One is in a Duo admin group, another one is in AD Duo group. So I'm gonna just selected those two groups, save the configuration, and I'm gonna click on complete setup button to complete the setup, setting up the AD sync. Now, because that we have configured everything required on the Duo admin panel to sync the users and groups, we can go ahead and wait for the Duo authentication proxy to sync all the groups and users. It is going to take a couple of hours because it is on a scheduled basis. We're going to sync it manually now. When we synced it, you could see that there are 3 users and the 2 groups are synced to the Duo service. Now let's go to the users and see what users have been synced. There are 3 users residing in these 2 groups. I'm not going to make use of the first entry that was created just for an testing purpose. I'm going to make use of a second and a third user, Duo admin and Duo user, for my entire demonstrations. Duo admin is going to be used for whenever I'm trying to access an admin UI or device administration, whereas Duo user is going to be used for remote access VPN use case or a portals use case or a network access use cases. So once after the syncing the users, we are supposed to actually associate the second factor authentication. The second factor authentication can be added like a phone or a tablet. I'm going to add my phone here by providing my phone number. So I need to enroll so-and-so user, Duo admin user and Duo user was supposed to be enrolling with the phone services Duo in order to get the push notification from the Duo. So I'm going to actually send the activation link to over the SMS and email so that I can enroll this. I've completed that enrollment process already. I don't want to actually show that because the enrollment process is very easy for you to enroll your phone. Once you get the SMS and email notification, you can click on basically the link provided over the SMS and email, and then you can actually enroll. Now, so far, what we have done is an Active Directory syncing. Now that we have configured the Active Directory sync, we're going to actually go ahead and protect an application. We're going to make use of Cisco ISE RADIUS. Search for Cisco ISE RADIUS and click Protect to protect this application. Now this brings up an integration key, security key, API host names required for us to populate them in the authentication proxy configuration file. So I already copied them and I'm going to paste them in the Duo authentication proxy. So I've done that and then I'm going to save the configuration. Once after saving the configuration, we are supposed to actually validate and then we can actually restart the service if everything looks fine. You could see that my device is secure. Duo authentication proxy was asking me to allow incoming request for the firewall. So it's adjusting the firewall in order to allow the incoming and outgoing connections to the Duo cloud services. So I just restarted the service and it got started. Now that we have completed the required configuration on the Duo admin panel, let's go ahead and see what configuration that we required in Duo, in ISE. So I'm logging into ISE, going ahead with an identity management, external identity source, and I'm going to define the radius token. So basically, I'm pointing ISE to an external radius token, which is my authentication proxy. So my authentication proxy is 192.168.100.57. The server timeout value, I'm keeping it high. The reason behind that is by default, it was having the 3 seconds. In order to complete the 2-factor authentication within 3 seconds, you're supposed to accept the push notification. That might not be possible, right? That was the reason why we were adjusting the server timeout to 60 seconds. in order to approve your push notification beyond the primary authentication. So that's what the configuration view required on the ISE side. Once after defining the external identity source, we can actually go ahead and configure the sequence. So I'm going to make use of Duo Auth Proxy, Duo sequence. This Duo identity source sequence, even though there is only one identity source there, I'm going to make use of this Duo sequence in my policies, basically. So now that we have already configured the Radius Duo Authentication Proxy, we're going to go ahead and associate to Admin UI. That's how basically you're associating the Admin UI to be protected using the Duo Authentication Proxy. Now, the users are there. You don't have to actually, the users are there in Active Directory. And once after verifying the primary authentication source, ISE is going to get the access acceptor from the Radius authentication. But how do we say that so-and-so user who's trying to log into the ISE Admin UI was having the super admin privileges? For that purpose, we're going to actually create a shadow admin user, the same user, mark it as external so that you don't have to actually provide the credentials, and associate this Duo admin shadow user to a super admin. This is how basically you're going to get super admin privileges whenever he is trying to log in. So let's log out and see how the end user experience is going to be. So I'm logging in with a Duo admin user. Once after providing the credentials, I'm going to get a login prompt, the push notification to approve it. So once after successful authentication, I'd logged in as a super administrator. So let's verify it with the reports as well. Go to the administrator login report, and you could see the administrator authentication was successful. Now, you could also actually verify it in the Duo for all authentications. So go to the Duo admin panel, go to that user, and you could see that so-and-so user got authenticated. So that's how basically you're trying to protect Duo ISE Admin UI with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. Now, what about second solution that I talked about, using the single sign-on or a SAML method? Before we get started with a SAML way of configuring it and protecting your admin UI access, I wanted to give a glimpse of how Duo single sign-on is going to work. The Duo SSO can be integrated with your on-prem Active Directory, if at all the users are residing in your on-prem Active Directory. If the users are actually residing in your cloud services, something like Azure, Azure AD, Google, Okta, OneLogin, so on and so forth, you could also actually point them to the cloud-based identity providers. So in our demonstration, I'm going to make, in order for the Duo SSO to work with the on-prem Active Directory, we require Duo Authentication Proxy. That's how basically the Duo SSO is going to function. Now, let me help you with a flow diagram, how the admin user who's trying to log into the ISE UI gets the required privileges. So when an admin user trying to access Cisco ISE login page, you're going to see, once after everything was configured, you're going to see that he can also make use of a login with a SAML. When you click on the login with SAML, it will take you to the Duo SSO SAML service provider, where you're going to enter the credentials. Once the credentials are submitted to Duo SSO, it's going to take it to the Duo Authentication Proxy. The Duo Authentication Proxy in turn validates them with an Active Directory. When the Active Directory says that when the primary authentication source says it's successful, then we can, the Duo Authentication Proxy forwards the same authentication request as part of a second factor authentication to Duo Cloud Service for push notification. Once the push notification is approved, Duo SSO is going to get you back the user's role in assertions itself. That's where you're going to get the right privileges. If the assertion is wrong, obviously you're not going to get the right privileges to the UI. Now that's how it's going to work. And let's talk about the demo. If at all, this is the first time that you're trying to configure single sign-on, when you log into the, when you log into the Duo admin panel, if this is what the first time that you're trying to configure single sign-on, you have to activate and start the setup. And we need basically Duo SSO is a cloud-based service. Duo itself offers this SSO subdomain in order for users and devices and applications to be able to log in with these SSO subdomains. Now we're trying to actually create a subdomain. We need to just ensure that it is unique. It is not being used. Let's confirm that it is not being used. And once after that, you need to define the authentication source where the identity providers are there. If as I said earlier, if the identity provider is your on-prem Active Directory, you need authentication proxy to be installed and configured. If at all your users are residing in the cloud itself, like Azure AD, Google, Okta, then you can make use of a SAML identity provider. In my demonstration, I'm going to make use of my on-prem Active Directory. So I'm going to click on the Add an Active Directory. Now we need to configure the authentication proxy in order to set up this SSO process. So click Add Authentication Proxy, and it will tell you what are the configuration that you require in order to configure the authentication proxy to talk to the SSO enrollment. So we're going to copy the SSO configuration required and paste it in the authentication proxy configuration file. Just copy them, and I'm going to paste them in the Duo authentication proxy. I'm going to uncomment the service account username and password. The service account username and password should be having administrative privileges in order to query the Active Directory for the access. Now, once after that, we don't have to save the configuration. We can save the configuration and restart the service. But let's go ahead and look at other configuration required. In order for the Duo authentication proxy to enroll in the Duo SSO process, we need to execute this second, as part of a second step, we need to execute this command. So let's copy this command entirely. And let's go ahead and bring up our command prompt with our administrative privileges. And let's execute that. What it does basically is to allow the authentication proxy to be enrolled against the Duo SSO process. So once after that, let's go ahead and verify whether the Duo authentication proxy is connected to it or not. Good. The Duo authentication proxy was able to actually enroll and connect it to the SSO. Now let's go ahead and configure the other parameters required. So we defined authentication proxy, but we haven't defined where is your Active Directory. So we're going to configure the Active Directory. Remember, earlier we configured the Active Directory to sync the users and groups and all. But now in the SSO process, we were trying to configure the Active Directory here once again, in order for the SSO to work. So we're going to configure the same parameters, something like where is my Active Directory residing? That's my Active Directory IP address, 192.168.100.10. It's in 389 port. And I'm going to actually search for the entire forest, entire domain. And I'm going to leave the defaults as is. And go to the third section where you are supposed to actually provide permitted email domains. The permitted email domains are something like you are the one who is owning this domain. If the users are actually coming from a dominion.in, that's where my Active Directory domain is there. you're supposed to actually provide this email domain validation. That means you're supposed to actually copy this text record as a text record in your DNS entries, DNS server. If you don't own this domain, obviously the SSO process is not going to work, because the SSO is a cloud hosted service. Whenever if you are trying to access, if you're trying to log in with the pavagupta@cisco.com, what does it mean? You're supposed to actually own cisco.com domain in order to allow the Duo SSO to process this cisco.com domain. That's what we are trying to configure it. You're trying to configure dominion.in so that the users duoadmin@dominion.in, duo user@dominion.in can log in with the required domain email. So I've already done that. I've already copied that, and I'm going to save the configuration. So that is what you require for a single sign-on setup. Now let's go ahead and actually protect an application. Click on protect an application and search for generic SAML service provider and click protect against the generic SAML service provider. This brings up a application configuration. The metadata, it's going to consist of entity ID, single sign-on URL, single logout URL, metadata URL, so on and so forth. You don't have to copy them now. Basically, it was giving you all this information for you to actually configure in the service provider. So we have an option to download the certificate, and we have an option to download the SAML metadata as an XML file and can be uploaded to the service provider like an ISE. We're going to do that later. But in order for us to actually configure the service provider, the entity ID, so on and so forth, we were supposed to actually configure ISE with the same, right? The SAML has to be configured in the ISE. So I'm going to actually switch over to the ISE, and I'm going to log into the ISE Admin UI, go to the identity management, external identity sources, go to the SAML ID providers and configure a SAML. I'm just giving a name called SAML SSO. Submit the configuration. Now, in order for us to get the service provider info, we were supposed to associate this SAML IDP with a portals or an application. What application that we are trying to protect? We are trying to protect now the admin UI, right? So we're going to go ahead and switch from Duo Authentication Proxy to Duo SAML SSO and save the configuration. Now that we have associated SAML to the admin UI, we can go ahead to the SAML IDP provider that we configured earlier. Go to the service provider info, and now you could see that ISE portal was associated to this SAML provider. We're going to export this XML file, metadata, and we're going to extract this metadata zip file. Let's extract it. And I'm going to open that XML file. What this XML file consists of is an entity ID that we are interested in and session consumer service URL. Those are the two entities that we need, entries that we need in order for us to configure the Duo admin panel. So I'm going to just note them in my notepad just for our reference. Then I'm going to go to the Duo admin panel and I'm going to paste that entity ID and session consumer service URL. So then we're going to download the certificate and download the XML file. Now this certificate that we downloaded can be uploaded to the ISE trusted certificates, because whenever ISE was sending the request to the Duo SSO, ISE was supposed to accept the certificate that the Duo SSO was hosting, right? That was the reason why we're trying to actually import the certificate what Duo provides me into the trusted certificate store so that ISE can trust the Duo SSO. You can basically, once after setting up this, you can submit the configuration. And then let's go ahead to SAML IDP again, external identity providers, SAML SSO that we configured, and go to the identity provider configuration and choose the metadata that we downloaded from the Duo SSO. So Duo SAML. Save the configuration. The configuration is not done yet. We were supposed to actually associate group of users. So we're gonna make use of an attribute in order to pull the roles associated in the SAML assertion. So what I'm doing is I'm creating an attribute called groups. I'm going to rely on the groups attribute. If the assertion is coming up with an ISE admin, I wanted to associate with the superadmin privileges. So when you're getting redirected to SAML SSO, and once after the total authentication is successful, as part of a SAML assertion, you're going to get these assertion in the SAML itself using the groups attribute. Usually, this is where you're going to provide the privileges. If at all I want MNT access, then obviously we need another assertion into the picture. So I'm going to go ahead to the application that we are trying to configure, come down to the role attributes and define the attribute that just we configured in the ISE. Groups. Service provider's role is ISE admin is what we try to configure in ISE. That's the same service provider URL that we need. Then we can grab the Duo users. I just wanted to, we can rename it if at all we require. Admin portal and save the configuration. Now this is what we required in order for us to configure on the Duo and on the ISE. Now let's verify in end-to-end fashion. Now let's try to log into the ISE Admin UI. Now you could see there are two options available. You can log into the ISE with an internal user or with a SAML. I'm going to click on SAML, which is going to take me to the Duo SSO. I'm going to enter the email and the password. Once I get the push notification, I'm going to approve it. Once after the approve, during the SAML assertion itself, we're going to get the privileges to be associated. Because I just configured only one role, I got the superadmin access. So that is what you require in order for you to protect ISE Admin UI access with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. So let's go ahead as part of our second sequence. We are now talking about Duo device admin access. How do we protect a device admin access with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication? So a user who's trying to access the network access device for the device administration purpose, that's what the context that we're trying to do. But before we talk about the configuration that we required, we wanted to actually show you what is the purpose of actually making use of an ISE at the authorization level. You could make use, when you're talking about Duo authentication proxy, which is validating the Active Directory users, then why do we even require the ISE to be in first place? Of course, this is what the question that it's going to come up and haunt you most of the time. But the beauty and the advantages of ISE being used in this process is basically you're going to get an advantage of TACACS, granular policies, if you use ISE instead of actually sending it to Duo Authentication Proxy, which is validating the authentication sources and all, why, if we use ISE, obviously you're going to get the advantages of a TACACS, granular policies, authorization profiles, like you can define VLANs enforcers, GTs enforcer, ACL, DACL, so on and so forth with the power of ISE. And you can even actually make use of a trust set, context sharing, attributes gathering, so on and so forth. That's the beauty of using ISE at the authorization instead of actually, I mean, not instead. I would say that's where we were trying to actually get the advantage of ISE being used at the authorization level. Now, in a high level, this is what the flow it's going to look like. Whenever the user is trying to access the devices, network access devices, be it switch, wireless LAN controller, or a VPN over telnet, SSH, and web, the radius or TACACS request is going to be sent to the ISE device administration. And the ISE is going to forward the credentials to the Duo Authentication Proxy or on-prem. And Duo Authentication Proxy is going to in turn talk to your primary authentication sources. Once it gets validated, the Duo Authentication Proxy sends the request as part of a second factor authentication to Duo Cloud Service, and Duo Cloud Service sends the push notification or phone call or a passcodes to the user. And once the user approves that push notification, the user is going to get the device administration access. So that's at a high level. Now that you have seen basically how the Duo can be used as a multi-factor authentication, first of all, it brings to our notice, are you basically using any multi-factor products in your environment? That's what we wanted to get your opinion on. There is a Slido question, the Slido window that is going to pop up in your, just answer it. Just let us know whether you're making use of any multi-factor authentication products in your environment. I'm going to give a couple of seconds for you to answer it. The numbers keep on actually increasing. That's the reason why I was trying to not to divert myself to other Slido question or another slide. I wanted to give a couple of more seconds for you to answer this question. Okay, now the number seems to be almost frozen. I wanted to actually get started with the second Slido question. Rico, can you bring up a second Slido question? The question is basically, which MFA product are you making use of in your environment? Be it Duo, RSA, Okta, or any other multi-factor authentication products that you're making use of? Let us know your answer. The numbers are keep on increasing. I'm going to wait for a couple of more seconds for you to answer it. Keeps on increasing, so I'm going to wait for a couple of more seconds. So I think the numbers are frozen, so I'm gonna go ahead for my demo. So we're gonna see how do we protect the device admin access with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. So I'm gonna get started with an ISE configuration that we required. So I'm gonna go ahead and modify the external identity source, the radius token that we configured earlier, with a one parameter, the authentication. So, sorry. Here, basically, okay, got it. I wanted to ensure that basically the enabling identity cache is what we need to ensure that it is enabled. The reason of actually enabling this identity cache is to grab the authentication at the authorization, even at the command execution level. We wanted to make use of same identity instead of actually going with a multiple times. So that's what identity cache is what we require. Of course, you could also enable a passcode caching, but that is for a different purpose altogether. By enabling a passcode caching, you could make use of a same passcode when you're getting authenticated with network or access multiple times. So what I'm interested is about the identity caching. I just enabled it, and I wanted to ensure that we have enabled the device admin service or not. I'm making use of an ISE standalone, so I already enabled it. Just wanted to show you that it was already enabled. And let's go ahead and look at the network access device configuration. For the demonstration purpose, I was making use of a CSR here. The CSR was configured with an IP address, and as you could see, the location and device type was already associated to it. And I've already enabled the radius and TACACS authentication settings with a shared secret. I also enabled TACACS authentication setting with a shared secret of Cisco 123, and I enabled the single connect mode for the users who are trying to log in. And save the configuration. Now let's look at the policy set that we have configured. So let's go ahead and in the device administration work center, go to the device admin policy sets, and I've created a policy set in order for the devices, whenever the users are trying to log into the devices located in the San Jose Building 5, a Paris, or a Bangalore location, I wanted to match those requests with this policy set. So that's how I created a policy set for these these devices located in these locations. And I've already associated Duo sequence as part of my authentication policy. And as part of an authorization policy, I've configured two policies, one for CSR and another one for WLC. The CSR access, basically, what I'm going to demonstrate in this, if at all the user is belonging to the Duo admin group or a Duo group, I wanted to give admin allowed command set and an iOS profile to it. So what exactly this admin allowed command set is and iOS profile shell profile is. Let's look at the configuration of them as well. Go ahead and go to the TACACS profile and verify the iOS profile, shell profile. I was trying to give the maximum privileges, and I was actually enforcing a timeout and an idle time value. And coming down to the TACACS command set, admin allowed command set being used in the policy. And if you look at it, I was permitting all the commands. Of course, you can go as granular as possible, but for just a demonstration purpose, I've created this basic configuration. Now, if you look at the second policy that we configured with a WLC to give WLC access and 9800 shell profile to it. So that is what we require in order to secure the device admin access. But what is the configuration that we required on the network access device? So this is what the configuration will basically require. You can go as granular as possible, of course, but I wanted to show you the default configuration that we require at this point of time. I was just going with a very simple and basic configuration, which was enabling the AAA new model to let the authentication happen. And I was defining my TACACS server. The 192.168.100.104 is my ISE node IP address. And I was defining a group roles, group as well, AAA group. And I'm defining the AAA authentication, authorization, and accounting. So these are the configuration that we required in the network access device. So I copied already all this in my CSR router. I'm going to show you once after the authentication is also successful. I'm going to bring up a PuTTY application, and I'm trying to access my network access device IP address, and I'm logging in with a Duo admin user and a password. And once after password was provided, the primary authentication is successful. I got the Duo push notification and I got the access. So I'm trying to do some commands, configuration. I'm trying to save the configuration and trying to save the running configuration to a file. So let's go ahead and look at the TACACS LiveLog. And if you look at it, the authentication and authorization was successful. And if you look at the reports, device administration, I'm interested basically at the TACACS command accounting. This is the beauty of actually TACACS. If you make use of a radius as a protocol to protect the network device admin access, you might not be able to actually get the TACACS command accounting report. The reason behind that is you might be able to actually protect your authentication authorization, but you might not be able to get the command execution and command accountings. So I would be able to actually come to know with the help of TACACS command accounting, I would be coming to know what configuration changes, what commands have been executed by so-and-so user. That's so basically it was helping me out what changes have been made on so-and-so network access device. Now let's try to show the configuration. As I said earlier, AAA new model was already enabled on the CSR router, and I was making use of a AAA group and a AAA authentication authorization accounting configuration. So because we now just executed show running configuration file, we were trying to get whether we're gonna get that in the report as well or not. One thing to notice here is at the timeout specified under TACACS server. By default, if you don't specify this, the device admin, whenever you're trying to log into the network access device, it might be prompting you, or the authentication authorization has to be completed within 3 seconds or 5 seconds. That's not going to happen with the push notification, so on and so forth, right? You need to increase the timeout value. That's the reason why I gave ample amount of time in order for the users to accept the push notification. That's an important parameter to consider. Now that we have actually ran the command show running configuration, let's see whether that is going to help. So that's how basically you're going to protect your device admin access with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. Now coming down to the third aspect, protecting your network access. Whenever the users and devices connecting to the wired and wireless network, can I even protect that level of network access to the users and devices with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication? Now, well, the answer is yes, but this is basically, it brings up a question, should we even actually make use of it, the multi-factor authentication? The end user experience might be a little challenging. Couple of users might find this is a challenging whenever you are trying to connect to the wired and the wireless network. Every time that you need to accept the push notification or enter the passcode, that's going to be a little annoying. That might be the reason why some of the users are not preferring to use the multi-factor authentication at the wireless and wired environment. But if at all the organization was looking for enforcing the multi-factor authentication, of course, we do have it. Now, I'm not going to actually provide all the authentication protocol support, what is provided, but I'm going to concentrate on what exactly I'm going to demonstrate on. I was making use of a Duo authentication proxy itself, and I'm making use of an AnyConnect NAM model, which was configured already with the EAP fast mechanism. The way I configured this is the user who is trying to come over wired and wireless network to the PSN. The radius request is going to be sent to the PSN, and the PSN is going to forward that radius authentication request to the Duo authentication proxy as a radius token server. Now, the Duo authentication proxy can look into the primary authentication source like an LDAP and Active Directory and get the response out of it. That's what the demo, that's what the setup I've done. At a high level, or at a granular level, how this flow is going to work whenever the user is trying to connect to the network access device. First of all, the EAP communication happens, EAP well communication happens. As part of EAP well communication, the radius request is going to be sent from the network access device on behalf of client to the ISE. Now, ISE has once after getting the EAP response, it's going to initiate the protocol negotiation. Because we now configured fast EAP-GTC, the protocol is going to be negotiated with that protocol agreement, and then the phase one gets succeeded. Once the tunnel is established, then we're going to actually send the password credentials to the ISE. Now, once the credentials are validated, then we're going to send the second factor authentication to Duo Authentication Proxy, and Duo Authentication Proxy in turn sends it to the on-prem Active Directory for the primary authentication, and then as part of second factor authentication, it's going to send it to push notification. Once two primary authentication and secondary factor authentication was successful, it's going to basically get the radius access accept. That's how ISE can enforce a VLAN, SGT, DACL, ACL, so on and so forth on the user network access device session. Now, I told you the couple of challenges, of course, but there are a couple of customers who are interested to actually enforce MFA in their environment whenever the users and devices are connecting to the network over a wired and wireless. We wanted to actually get your opinion. Are you even interested to enforce an MFA for your wired and wireless network? Just let us know your opinion to the Slido question. Numbers are increasing. I think the numbers are not yet incremented. Okay, it's still increasing. Okay. I'm going to give a couple of more seconds for you to answer the Slido question. I think the numbers are frozen. I'm going to go ahead. While you're answering this Slido question, I'm going to actually go ahead and do the demonstration. So I wanted to actually show you what a configuration that we required. Of course, initially I was trying to actually create a policy set. I'm going to actually skip this ISE configuration because you could make use of a default policy set itself. Just my interest is whenever you're trying to create a policy, authentication policy, I'm going to go to the authentication policy straight away. And I'm going to show you what being used at the .1x authentication. So for wired and wireless .1x, I'm making use of a Duo sequence. That's nothing but Duo Authentication Proxy Radius token. For a MAB users, I'm going to make use of internal endpoints itself. And at the authorization policy, as long as the user belonged to the Duo admin group, I wanted to actually give the employee access. Duo AD group, sorry. I wanted to give permit access and I wanted to enforce an SGT, employee SGT to it. Now let's go ahead and look at the configuration that I've done on the client side. Now I'm logging into the client and I wanted to show you what NAM configuration that I did. So as part of a network access manager configuration, I was just enabling the EAP fast and EAP-GTC method. And this is the profile that I was enforcing on this endpoint at the wired network. It's an authenticating network. The user connection is what I tried. And at the user authentication level, EAP fast is what I'm making use of. And under that, EAP-GTC is what I'm making use of as a second, the inner layer of the EAP protocol. So that is the NAM profile that I enforced on this Windows 11 machine. Because it was now enforced with the NAM model, whenever I try to connect this endpoint to the network, it's going to ask me the credentials, username and password. Once after entering the credentials, I'm going to get the Duo prompt, a Duo push notification in order to get the access. And once I approve the push notification, you could see that under the LiveLog, the user got authenticated to the network. Now, this is going to be evident whenever you're trying to connect every time, whenever you move from one wireless network to another wireless network or roam between the flows, or whenever you close and open the laptop monitor, open your laptop. Let's look at the details of this authentication one. As you could see, this was actually negotiated with the EAP-GTC mechanism, and the request is being forwarded to Duo Authentication Proxy, and Duo Authentication Proxy gave the response access accept. Authentication was succeeded against the RADIUS Authentication Proxy, and the ISE was trying to grab the Active Directory groups and the attributes from the Active Directory, and then we were trying to give them the privileges accordingly. That's how we were trying to get the areas of access. Now, if I go to the Duo admin panel and look at the Duo user authentication happened on this, we could also see the authentication logins. You could see that the Duo user was logged into the user. And that's how basically you can protect your network access too, with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. So, I think we ran out of the time. We still have 2 more use cases to cover. Just bear with me a couple of more minutes. I'm going to get going with a little faster pace. So I want to actually show you how do you even protect the remote VPN access using the multi-factor authentication. So the context that we're talking about is a user who's coming over the VPN connecting to the network. Now, there are 2 ways. Of course, there are several ways for us to actually protect the remote access VPN, but I'm going to actually demonstrate 2 use cases where you can protect it using the Duo Authentication Proxy and the SAML one. Now, when a user with an AnyConnect installed coming from off-prem, whenever he's trying to access the VPN, whenever he's trying to connect to the VPN, he's going to provide the credentials to the ASE or an FTD. And ASE and FTD forwards it to the ISE, and ISE is going to actually send it to the Duo Authentication Proxy. And now Duo Authentication Proxy in turn sends it to your primary authentication source. The primary authentication source can be your Active Directory. In my demonstration, I was making use of an Active Directory. And once the primary authentication was successful, the Duo Authentication Proxy sends it to the Duo Cloud Service for the second factor authentication. The second factor authentication, if at all it was approved by the user, the Duo Authentication Proxy is going to send the access accept back to the ISE, and ISE in turn sends it the access accept to the ASE. That's how basically the VPN connection is going to be established from the end user point of view. Now, whereas if I try to make use of a SAML, basically the user connecting from the VPN, he's going to be redirected to the Duo SSO, where the Duo SSO cloud service was offering. You're going to enter the credentials. The entered credentials are going to be validated against the Duo Authentication Proxy. The entered credentials are going to be actually sent over to the Duo Authentication Proxy on-prem, and Duo Authentication Proxy in turn sends it to the Active Directory. Once Active Directory proves that the user exists, then the Duo SSO in turn sends it to the Duo cloud service for the second factor authentication. Once the Duo push notification was approved by the user, the Duo SSO sends the roles and attributes information back to the ASA in order to write the privileges. So basically, once after we get the authentication from the ASA, we can make use of an ISE at the authorization to give the access to the the VPN users. That's how you can actually protect the remote access VPN users as well with the help of Duo MFA. These are the two possibilities. Of course, there are other possibilities also, but I wanted to demonstrate one use case using the Duo authentication proxy, which is going to be pretty quick. What we're doing is basically we are looking ahead for an ASA VPN, which is already configured with an IP address, and the type was configured with the VPN concentrators. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a policy set. As long as it is from the VPN concentrator device type, then I wanted to match against with this policy set. Now, as part of an authentication, I'm making use of a Duo sequence. And as part of an authorization, as long as the user belongs to, let me just forward this. As part of an authorization, as long as the user belongs to AD Duo group, I wanted to give permit access and employees SGT, enforce SGT. Now that we have saved the configuration, let's look at the configuration required on the ASA VPN. So I wanted to actually show you the configuration required on the ASA too. So I'm going to make use of AnyConnect VPN wizard, connection setup wizard, in order to configure the VPN on the ASA. So I'm going to give it a name, RA-VPN. The VPN access interface is going to be outside, and I'm making use of an SSL itself. By default, it doesn't have any certificate. So for the demonstration purpose, I'm making use of a selection certificate. That's not a problem for me. And I'm going to actually go ahead and upload the AnyConnect or a Cisco secure client. So I'm going to upload the Cisco secure client, which is the latest and greatest one. And then I'm going to create a AAA server group. I'm naming it as ISE, and my ISE IP address is 104.192.168.100.104, and it is reachable via inside interface. I'm configuring this shared secret, which is same as what we configured under ISE network access device. And let's go ahead and verify the authentication and authorization. Of course, authentication, I wanted to make use of ISE as a AAA server group, and if at all the use it's breaking. This is the interesting point. The timeout, if you look at it, 5 seconds is what the ASA is going to wait for the authentication to have to complete. But we, with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication, this is another overhead. We need to actually increase the timeout value, because the Duo push notification you might not be able to actually complete the push notification within this 5 seconds, right? That was the reason why I was increasing the timeout value to 60 seconds. And I'm defining the DHCP pool. Let me just, this might not be the interest for you. So I'm configuring the DNS server where my domain name is. I completed the configuration. Now let's go ahead to the endpoint and connect it to the ASA. So once after entering the credentials, if the primary authentication is successful, I'm going to get the push notification. Once after the push notification was approved, I got the Access VPN terminal set established. So you could see that the user was actually sent to the Duo authentication proxy. And once the authentication proxy approves the notification, we have given the user access to it. That's how basically you're gonna get the, you're gonna protect the remote access VPN use case as well with the help of Duo multi-factor authentication. Now, the last and but not the least one, it's the ISE portal for access. How do we protect ISE portal access with the Duo multi-factor authentication? Again, we have two ways to protect it. One is through the Duo Authentication Proxy, that means a RADIUS token, or via SAML method. Now I'm going to actually, at a high level, if you look at the flow wise, a user who is trying to log into the My Devices portal, sponsor portal, and guest portal, he's going to enter the credentials on these portals, and the credentials submitted on these portals are going to be sent to the Duo Authentication Proxy, and the Duo Authentication Proxy has to be configured in ISE as a RADIUS token. And the Duo Authentication Proxy in turn validates these credentials against the primary authentication source. And once that is done, then the Duo Authentication Proxy sends the secondary factor authentication through the cloud service. And once the user gets the push notification and approves it, he's going to get the portal access accordingly. This is one way. The second way is through the SAML. The same user, when he's trying to log in or access the sponsor portal, he's not going to get the My Devices portal, sponsor portal, guest login page. Instead, he's going to be redirected to the Duo SSO IDP, where you're going to enter the credentials. I might have to modify this a little bit because my intention is not providing the credentials on your My Device portal and sponsor portal and SAML use case. Whenever you're trying to access the sponsor portal, My Device portal, and guest portal, you're going to get redirected to the Duo service provider, wherein you're going to actually enter the credentials. The credentials are going to be validated, and once it is, sends it to the Duo Authentication Proxy, and Duo Authentication Proxy is going to actually send it for the authentication. Now, as part of a second factor authentication, Duo Authentication Proxy forwards it to the cloud service, and once the push notification was approved, the user is going to get the access to the My Devices portal, sponsor portal, guest portal accordingly. That's how basically you can protect the ISE portal access. So we're going to see this in action during the demo. Before that demonstration, I'm trying to actually get your opinion on, are you even interested? You were able to see the thing, right? Basically, we were trying to configure ISE in one way, and then we were trying to configure the admin panel for the protecting application, so on and so forth. Are you interested to actually this integration be tightly made available in ISE UI itself, rather than actually being outside of an ISE? And that's what my opinion is. That's what my question is. I wanted to get your opinion on this. Okay, the numbers are still increasing, so I'm going to give a few more seconds for you to answer it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go directly into the demonstration. Once after the demo, I'm going to try to wrap up the webinar because I don't want to waste your time. It's already gone past the hour. So the numbers are still increasing. Let me just go ahead for the demonstration. Now, what we have done is basically under ISE, we're going to actually, first of all, make use of, for the demonstration purpose, I was making use of a My Devices portal. And My Device portal, initially, if you try to access it, what happens? I configured this My Devices portal with an FQDN. This FQDN, if you try to access this FQDN straight away from your enterprise organization, it's going to get redirected to My Devices portal, wherein you can actually key in the credentials to get the access to the My Devices portal. So I can test it out straight away also. So I'm going to actually provide the user credentials like Duo user, and the password. Once after successful authentication, I'm going to straight away get the access to the My Device portal. That's how it's basically going to work, right? Now, instead of actually sending it for the ISE authentication, because it was making use of internal database for the users to authenticate, I wanted to make use of a Duo instead of actually my devices portal sequence. So I'm going to associate Duo sequence, which is nothing but a radius token. And now I'm going to try it out the same thing. Now this time it took me to the same my device portal. Once after keying the credentials, it's basically waiting for the response. So the primary authentication was successful. The second factor authentication, I got the push notification. So that's how basically you can protect my device portal using the Duo multi-factor authentication with the help of a Duo authentication proxy. But what if you wanted to make use of a SAML? Now that we have already configured single sign-on, let's go ahead and configure. All right. I'm going to skip the report section. I just wanted to show that that login was successful from the Duo authentication proxy. Now, I wanted to actually show you the SAML part of it. If the same MyDevice portal has to be secured with a SAML, I'm going to create another SAML IDP called Duo SAML MyDevices portal, something like that. Submit the configuration. The SAML identity provider has to be associated with the MyDevices portal. So I'm going to go to the MyDevices portal again. Go to the portal authentication, portal settings. So instead of Duo sequence, now I'm going to associate Duo SAML. So I'm going to straight away go to that Duo SAML MyDevices and save the configuration. Now this is not enough, right? You're supposed to actually export the metadata. Go to the service provider. Now that you have associated MyDevices portal to this SAML IDP, you can export this XML file. And what we are interested in is, in this XML is, we were interested in entity ID, assertion URL, and the single sign-out URLs. So let's copy those URLs and let's go to the duoadmin and protect this SAML service provider application. So I'm trying to create two applications because entity IDs are going to be different for different portals. So I'm going to paste that entity IDs, assertion URLs, and single logout URLs right there. So once after that, I'm going to go ahead, download the certificate, modify the name of this SAML to something like My Devices Portal, and save the configuration. I can download the certificate and the certificate and the metadata. So once after downloading the certificate and metadata, we need to actually associate that metadata, download it from the SAML, a service provider, but I'm not making use of groups here. So now let's try to access My Devices portal again. If you try to access My Devices portal now with the help of FQDN, now it's trying to get you redirected to the Duo SSO. Now where you're going to actually enter your user email address and password. Once after the primary authentication is successful and second factor authentication is successful, you're going to get the push notification. Sorry, you're going to get the access to the My Devices portal accordingly. Now that's how basically I wanted to show this. Now what really I wanted to actually close this with the help of actually the with the help of policies defined in the, we were trying to actually create a policy in the Duo admin panel in order for the user who is trying to access the device, who is trying to access the My Device portal, has to be secured enough. This is what the security compliance what a Duo offers you, right? So I created the device policy, and I'm associating this policy something like a new underscore policy. Create this. And I'm trying to associate this to an application that we have created called My Devices Portal. Go to the policy section and associate this policy. What exactly going to happen now? If you try to now access My Devices portal, the same My Devices portal, the experience is going to be a little different now. When you try to access My Devices portal from your laptop, what happens is it's going to still ask for username and password, but this time, because you're looking for a security compliance, it's going to look for whether you have a device, Duo device health app or not. Once the device Duo health app is there and it is shows that it is secured, checking for device health, sorry, then only it's going to basically allow you to access this My Devices portal. That's how you're trying to protect the device, the service portals also with the help of a Duo device health. Now that's basically it. I wanted to get away from these two parameters. One thing is you can achieve the secure compliance from an ISE posture model as well as from a Duo compliance model. But I wanted to just let you know, these are not two integrated factors so far as of now. You cannot make use of a Duo posture compliance in ISE. They are two independent entities at this point of time. ISE posture compliance is more granular than the Duo. You could see that there are a lot of options when you're going with an ISE posture service, if you're looking for a device compliance. But whereas if you go with a device health app, it's going to offer you some capabilities, but which are not as granular as what ISE posture service is offering. So with that consideration, I wanted to actually wrap up this webinar with these resources.